there, my name is Katie Saint. The purpose of this video is to talk about MAPP. The hope is that after watching this video, you will feel equipped to attempt this assessment and use it in your practice. But I would recommend that you have somebody work with you who has more experience as well to help you make sure you understand everything before independently administering it. So I'm going to start with giving you an overview. In the MAPP, there is several sections. Some sections are age specific and some sections are not. So the first section it's called the Milestone Assessment, and there's 3 levels within the Milestone Assessment. The first level is targeting ages 0 to 18 months. So if a child masters all the goals in this section, that indicates that they're at an 18-month developmental level. So the second section is targeting 18 months to 30 months. So again, if the child masters all of the goals in this section, then they would be considered at a 30-month developmental level. The next section is the last section of the Milestone Assessment, which targets ages 30 months to 48 months. So once a child has mastered all of the goals in this section, they've completed the Milestone Assessment goals, and they are considered at a 48-month developmental level. So the next section is the Early Echoic Skills Assessment. It looks like this. It's actually part of the Milestone Assessment, but you can also use it independently of the Milestone Assessment. So it's a really great guide for you to break down where a child's at with his language development or her language development. So it has different categories, and each category targets different sounds. So the first sounds, the first group has sounds like ah, wow, be, ni, ooh, where the second level has words like baby, go eat, nighttime, bunny. So the thought process is that you need to master the level 1 sounds before you get to level 2. Level 2 sounds will need the skills that are developed when you are able to say the words or sounds in the first level. So this serves as a guide for you what kind of sounds you should be targeting with your clients. If your client can't master the level 1 sounds, then you shouldn't be working on sounds from level 3 or level 4 if the child isn't developmentally there yet. So then the next assessment is not age specific. It is the barriers assessment. And this is a super useful assessment, especially when working with insurance companies. You can use this assessment to show what the barriers are that are getting in the way of learning. So the assessment is called MAPP Barriers Assessment. And so it breaks down 24 categories to help you assess what kind of things are getting in the way of learning. So we'll go through this in a little bit to help explain what these mean and how to work through them. So then next is the transition assessment. Now this assessment takes all of the assessments in the MAPP and puts them together to give you a picture of what kind of supports will this client need, what kind of things, deficits, things like that will this client need if they're going to a school or some new environment, what kind of supports are in place or will need to be in place. So that can be helpful for giving you a big picture. So then next, the last section of the book is the task analysis skills tracking section, and this is extremely helpful. This partners with the first milestone assessment, and this breaks down for you what sub-goals you need to work on in order to master the goals from the milestone assessment. So this is going to help you target what you need to work on to develop these skills. So this is extremely helpful and serves as a guide for you as to what to work on. So now I'm going to flip to the beginning of the book, and I'm going to walk through in a little bit more detail about how to actually fill out this assessment. So here is the first chart. You can get this chart on the VB-MAPP website, or you can purchase this book and it will be included in the book. So the way this works, every time you fill out the milestone assessment, you will use this chart. And if you saw, there's dotted lines and solid lines. So you would either leave it blank, fill it up to the dotted line, or fill it up completely. So we'll go over the first set of questions to give an example of this. So the first section that it's assessing is manding. So now remember, manding is another word for request. So does the child use words, signs, or pictures to ask for desired items or activities? That's the first question. So then you'll see it breaks it down into 5 different subpoints. So you're going to go through here and you're going to answer yes or no. And so you can give it 0, a partial where you fill in up to the dotted line, or the full. So number 1, emits 2 words, signs, or pecs, but may require echoic, imitative, or other prompts, but no physical prompts. So if that's true for your child, completely true, you would fill it in. Now, if you download the VB-MAPP app, it will actually give you even more detail about whether to fill it in up to the dotted line or to go with the full prompt. So that's really helpful if you're debating on whether or not it's qualified to fill it in all the way. Also, the VB-MAPP app translates a lot of the ABA terms for you. So one common complaint about this assessment is it uses too many ABA terms. And so sometimes people get confused and aren't sure what the terms really mean. So if you download the app, you can click on the hints and then they tell you another way to look at that question so you understand. So that's super, super helpful. So based on your answers to each of these, you would continue filling in, you would continue going along until you started getting many no's in a row. So let's say that you said yes, complete yeses to all 5 of the questions in the manding category. On your chart, you would have it filled in all the way up to here. This would be completely filled in. Now, before you moved on to the tacting category, you would keep going with the manding and you would move to level 2. So now you would have to flip ahead in the book. Level 2 for manding starts on page 11 in my book, and then there's questions 6 through 10. So again, you're going to go through these questions, you're going to answer them, and if you can keep going, if you've answered full yeses to all of them, or if you didn't get many no's in a row, you would then move on to level 3 manding. So level 3 has questions 11 through 15. So here is where those questions would be. And again, you're going to be filling these questions in on the chart. So the goal is that you're eventually going to fill in this whole chart and the child's going to master all of these goals. So as you assess this, you just keep going until you get a bunch of no's in a row. So the next section is on tacting. Again, you just go through all the levels until you get the no's. Then there's listener responding. There are some sections that don't go all the way up to level 3. So if that's the case, you just simply go as far as they go and then you stop. There's also some that don't start until higher levels. For example, group activity, linguistics, math, those don't start in level 1. So once you've mastered many of the things in level 1, and you're doing a lot of level 2 work or level 3 work, then you can start working on those. But if most of the child's skills are at that level 1 level, don't start working on those additional categories until that's where they are. So another thing to note is it's your goal to have the child move up together. Most kids are going to have splinter skills where in some areas they're really high and in some areas they're lower. So it's important that you don't target the really high skills, that rather you focus on the lower skills, because the bigger the gap, the harder it is for kids to catch up, and you can actually cause them to delay even further by focusing on their strengths already. So we want to catch them up. We want to help them move up together so that they can be at the place they need to be developmentally. So once you have completed the VV-MAPP Milestone Assessment, you can determine how you're going to use it from there. Some people use it for billing purposes where they're submitting this information to insurance companies to help the insurance companies understand exactly where their client is at. And then they would resubmit the assessment every, say, 6 months or 3 months or whatever their prior authorization period is. And what you would do then with this assessment is up on the top, you can write in when you assessed it, what the date was, what their age was, things like that. But then for the graph, you would simply use a different color each time you assess it. And this is extremely helpful because it gives you just a quick snapshot of where the child is at and what kind of progress they're making. So this is a really helpful visual to show progress. So if you're not making a lot of progress, that's where the task analysis in the back of the book is extremely helpful. So there are data sheets that go with the task analysis. So these data sheets break down the subpoints for each goal. So maybe your child isn't mastering the goals of the milestone assessment, but they are mastering some of these sub goals. If that's the case, you can show that with these data sheets. And so that's going to be helpful to show progress, to show that yes, we're not mastering some of these big goals, but we are still moving forward and making progress with these smaller goals. So that's super helpful. So next, what I want to focus on is the barriers assessment. And I'm actually going to go through and describe what each of the questions mean because they're worded with ABA language, and that can confuse people at times. So the first one is negative behaviors. This one's pretty straightforward. This is just assessing what kind of problem behaviors happen that get in the way of learning. Some kids are really smart and are age appropriate academically, but it's their negative behaviors that are getting in the way of learning. So that's what this one is assessing. The next one is instructional control. This one's really about compliance. How well do they follow through with demands? Do they escape and avoid and do all these things to get out of the work that they're supposed to do? So that's what this one is. The number 3 is absent, weak, or impaired manding repertoire. So again, this one is assessing how well do they ask for things. And so questions, they'll have, for each question, they have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So each one will describe what the number means. So for the barriers assessment, the higher the score, the more severe it is. So your goal would be that the client would have a really low score in the barriers assessment. If they have a high score, this could explain the lack of progress that a client might be making because they have so many barriers to learning that it's hard for them to make progress. And if that's the case, you need to make a plan for how you're addressing those barriers. How are we going to solve this issue so the client can make progress? So The next one is absent, weak, or impaired tacting repertoire. So it's hard for a client to ask for things if they can't label things. So remember, tacting means label. So if the client can't label anything, it's going to be hard for them to ask. So this is an important skill to develop as well. So that's what number 4 is getting at. Number 5 is absent, weak, or impaired motor imitation. So again, this is the child's ability to imitate your motor actions. When you tell them to clap, will they clap in response? Or can they physically not do that? Do they just refuse? What's going on here? So next would be the absent, weak, or impaired echoic repertoire. So again, this is about that language development. Can you say to the child, repeat after me, say this, say that? Can they copy most words, or can they copy nothing? Are you starting at ground zero with getting them to say any sounds or words? So echoic behavior is helpful for developing language. So if they don't have echoic behavior, that can be a barrier to learning. So next is absent, weak, or impaired visual, perceptual skills, and matching to sample. So this is an example of this one would be just having a bunch of flashcards out. Can they sort through the flashcards and match them? Can they visually work through that? We use that type of thing for skill development. So it's helpful if the child has the ability to do that. Next is weak or impaired listening repertoire. So this one is about their ability to comprehend directions. When they are working on tasks and you tell them that they need to do something, this isn't a compliance issue. This is an understanding issue. Can they understand you? So next is absent, weak, or impaired intraverbal repertoires. So intraverbal is the ABA term for conversation skills. Basically, it's that back and forth in conversation. If you ask them, how are you? They say, I'm good, or they can answer WH questions, things like that. So if the child doesn't have intraverbal abilities or conversation abilities, that's going to slow down progress. That's going to make communication with them more difficult. So next one, weak or impaired social skills. So this assessment is commonly used with autism, and often kids with autism have social skill deficits. So this one's really common, and this could get in the way of progress of a lot of the goals, communication goals, social goals, interaction goals, play goals, things like that. So this needs to be addressed. Number 11, prompt dependence. So many of our clients are dependent on us prompting them, telling them, hey, you need to brush your teeth, hey, you need to put your shoes on, hey, let me put your coat on for you, things like that. And so we want to fade that out. We don't want them to be dependent on us for their basic needs. We want to teach them to be independent. So sometimes we have to be intentional about programming those things in to fade our prompts out. So that's what this question is addressing. Number 12 is scrolling responses. So scrolling refers to basically them guessing. You ask them a question, instead of thinking about the answer and giving you a legitimate answer, they're just quoting movies, or they're just throwing words out at you that don't really make sense. You can tell they're not thinking about it. They're just scrolling through answers. So we want to avoid this. We want to get around this. So this is what that question is looking for. Are they just giving scrolling answers, or are they actually thinking about the answer and trying to give you a legitimate one? So next one is impaired scanning skills. So this one is addressing, okay, you have this big mess in front of you. Can they look through it and pick out the relevant information? Can they sort through a bunch of stuff and say, yep, that's the thing I need for this task? So next one is failure to make conditional discriminations. So this is another ABA term that is looking at how easily does the client pick up on patterns? How easily are they discriminating between the different contingencies in place? So for example, when I'm present, the rules are you have to sit nicely, you have to comply, but when Susie's present, you can run wild and scream and eat all the candy. So is the client discriminating between the different rules that are present when different people are present, or are they understanding different conditional changes that happen? So we're picking up on how well does the client pick up on patterns in their situation, in their environment. So if a client is slow to pick up on these patterns, that could mean also that they are going to be slower at being responsive to reinforcement, for example. So say you want the child to work for a reward, but they're not making the connection that that behavior gets them a reward, it's going to slow down progress. So next one is failure to generalize. So you've developed the skill, but can they do it with other people? Can they do it in other settings? Things like that. So this is important that they can generalize, because if a skill is only able to be produced in very specific environments, that's not as useful. So number 16 is weak or atypical motivating operations. So motivating operations is the ABA term for rewards, basically. What motivates the client is really what this is getting at. So some clients, it's really hard to find a reward that they'll work for. So that's what this question is getting at. Can you motivate the child? Can you find something that he'll work for? Or does it feel near impossible to find something that they care about? So the next one partners with this in the sense that the response requirement weakens the motivating operation. So what that means is, as soon as you tell the client, hey, you can have this really cool race car, but you're going to have to do some worksheets first. And then he's like, nope, don't care. I don't want that anymore. I used to want that, but now that you're going to make me work for it, no, thank you. So sometimes we work with kids who lose motivation for their reward as soon as we tell them what to do. So that's what this question is getting at. Next is reinforcement dependent. So it's always our goal that we eventually fade reinforcement out to more naturally occurring reinforcement. So we don't want to always have to say, here's a sticker for doing a good job. Eventually, we want the child to just do a good job because that's what they do. So we have to be intentional about programming the fade of reinforcement out. Sometimes the kids that we work with are very resistant to that fading process. So that's what this question is getting at. Next one is self-stimulation. So I worked with a client once who loved to look up and down at walls. Any straight lines, he would track with his eyes and go up and down, up and down, up and down. He would do this for hours. So trying to get him to focus and work on a task was really difficult because we couldn't eliminate the straight lines from his environment. So we had to try and get him to focus despite his desire to look up and down at these straight lines. So stimming or self-stimulation can sometimes get in the way of learning. So this question is assessing that. Are they doing things that are internally reinforcing or fun to them that's slowing down learning? Next is articulation problems. So this is just getting at, are they hard to understand? Maybe they can talk, but you really don't know what they're saying. So that's all that question is asking. Next, OCD behaviors, obsessive compulsive behavior. So sometimes our clients are, if we're talking about autism again, but not just autism, sometimes our clients get obsessed in a routine or a ritual that they feel like it just has to happen. And so they don't want to move on with their learning or the activities until they complete this task that they've determined in their head needs to be done. So this can really cause a lot of anxiety. This can really get in the way of learning. So that's what this question is assessing. Next one is hyperactive behavior. If a client can't sit and attend for any amount of time, if they're constantly moving and constantly active, it's very hard for them to learn. So that's what this question addresses. Next is failure to make eye contact or attend to people. So if they're not attending to you, it's going to be harder for them to follow your directions, listen to you, and understand what's expected. So this is a skill that needs to be worked on. Then last but not least is sensory defensiveness. Some of the kids that we work with or adults are extremely sensitive to touch. So if you touch their arm, if you get too close to them, it's even the eye contact is too overstimulating for them. So if that's the case, that's going to cause some delays in learning and it's going to cause some obstacles. So we want to work through this defensiveness. We might create a systematic desensitization program or an exposure therapy program to help reduce that defensiveness. So the chart for this assessment is in the beginning of the book, right by the chart for the Milestone Assessment. So this is what the chart looks like. And you can fill it out multiple times and put the dates, and this is going to show your progress at addressing those barriers. Again, you can use the barriers assessment for any age level. It's an extremely useful assessment. So the next assessment, the transitions assessment, the chart for that looks very similar, and it's going to be right next to the transition assessment. And so this one is more straightforward and you just go through and answer, and then you'll mark the score indicated based on the description. So that is the overview of the VB MAPP. It's one of my favorite assessments. I think it's very thorough and it's extremely helpful so that as a therapist, you're not guessing what skills to work on. If you work on the skills in the order indicated by VB MAPP, that's supposed to be the most effective and developmentally appropriate order to go through. So it can give you confidence that you're working on the right skills in the right order. So this is a great assessment. There's more training that you can pursue to be more proficient in it, but hopefully this gives you an overview and the confidence to start diving into it so that you can feel proficient in it yourself. So I hope this was helpful.